Well, thank you very much. So just first question is, can everybody see the first slide just to make sure we're looking at that? Cool. Good to go. Hate to be talking about, look at the slide and nobody can see it. Obviously, we're talking about neurodiversity today. That is going to be our whole focus. And I hopefully will manage by the time we get done with this presentation to help explain the what and the why of what neurodiversity is all about. And the big thing that I'm hoping you'll take away when we get done, so we'll just give it to you up front so I can remind you about it at the end, is that we need all different types of brains that work and process and perceive in all different types of ways if we really want to succeed. When we look at neurodiversity, we'll just start with a little explanation of it because it's hard to dive into a subject if you don't understand what the wordings actually mean. And neurodiversity actually came out of an autism movement itself from a woman, Judy Singer, who is in Australia. But neurodiversity has grown like many different diversity things have grown. And nowadays it takes in all different types of people, both named and unnamed groups that think distinctly different than the norm. And I happen to be autistic myself. So I'm going to be presenting this from the autistic point of view, but don't worry, I'm going to cover neurodiversity of what it is at the whole, but when I'm giving a perspective to give you an idea of how different things can be, it will be my own perspective because, hey, you only know the life that you live yourself. But I think you'll easily be able to extend that out to other groups and get much greater understanding from it. What is neurodiversity? Neurodiversity is actually a very, very easy concept. When we go and think about humans, just think about ourselves. We have all different colors of eyes. Some people have brown eyes, and some people have green eyes, and some people have hazel, and there's even gold-colored eyes, and I happen to have blue eyes. And we don't think anything about that. We don't think that one of those eye colors is strange or weird. We don't go, oh, those blue-eyed people, they're just some certain way. We just accept that eye colors are just normal human variation. But what we often don't think about is the fact that our brains, the most complex organ in our entire body, has as much, or actually far more variation than eyes have. And medical imaging has proven that, the way that our brains are folded, the way that the connectivity, the white tissue connects together in the brains, all different things like that vary from individual to individual. And the way that your brain is shaped and formed and wired is going to control your default style of perceiving, processing, and thinking. And all of these different ways of perceiving and processing and thinking are normal for humans, just like eye colors are normal for humans. So if we want to really just sum up neurodiversity is simply for a number of different factors. We all think in different ways. We perceive in different ways. And those differences, that uniqueness is what brings innovation and new perspectives so that we can do better than we've done before because we have new ideas to think about, new ways to leverage them. I like to explain it using this concept I call the neurocloud. And in the neurocloud, the way it works, if you look at this picture, just think you've got this cloud there and it's got all these pieces of little confetti and glitter floating around. And each one is representing a different way that a human can possibly perceive, process, and think. And the important thing with the neurocloud is all humans belong in the neurocloud. You can't get out of the neurocloud if you have a brain that is functioning. Just like you can't get out of diversity, it doesn't matter what group you are, you're still part of diversity. You're all part of neurodiversity also. And all we have are human traits. People like to refer to things that there's ADHD traits, there's autism traits, there's dyslexia traits, but they're really all just human traits because we can find those exact same traits maybe at different intensities, but in any human. So in the neurocloud, we've got all these traits represented. They kind of are moving around and things start clumping together a little bit. And we start getting groupings that are more similar. And when we look at the left-hand kind of area, you can see there's a green border drawn around it. If you can read it, it says neurotypical in there. And those marks look a little different than the marks on the outside of it. And that is a group that we refer to as neurotypical. And what is neurotypical? Neurotypical is really just the largest cohesive group of humans that think, perceive, and process in a generally similar manner. We all accept we're all individuals. None of us are clones of each other. We don't think identically at all. But there's enough similarity that this group tends to be fairly cohesive. And because of that, they tend to be the ones who get to set the norms and decide what right really is, because they appear as the largest group, because all the other groups are not very cohesive. We kind of stick off in our own little pieces. Now, if we step outside of the neurotypical arena and go over the green line, and the green line really should be a gradient, not a sharp line, but my art skills aren't that great. Because it's not just a sharp cutoff where suddenly you're one or the other. It's not like you have a cold or you don't have a cold. It's gradient between them. But outside that line, we have what we refer to as neurodistinct. And neurodistinct is defined as somebody who perceives, processes, and thinks in a distinctly different manner than neurotypicals do. And it has lots of different named and unnamed groups to it. Named groups would be things such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, on and on. But there's also unnamed groups. There's people who obviously think in unique, different pattern ways, but the medical community hasn't come up with names to assign to them. But they definitely don't think like the general norm does. So what is it that we want to take away from this whole idea of the neurocloud? A couple things. First off, we all are unique. We're all individuals, whether we fall into a group or, whichever, neurotypical, neurodistinct. We're all individuals. We're not identical. We're not homogeneous. But the other thing that really is important to think about is the further apart you are within the group, so the more difference there is in your style of perception, of processing, of thinking, the more challenging communication becomes. And if you have to jump over the divide from neurotypical to neurodistinct, it's like adding a lot more distance because you're dealing with very, very different styles of communication and thinking. And we're going to talk about some of those so you can get a really good idea of that. So big takeaway is simply, further apart you are, the more difficult communication is. We're all humans, we're all individuals, but there are definitely different groups within that, and there is a more dominant group we call neurotypicals. This one is one of my fun ones. I love this. If you could just drop in the chat, what is it you see? And we'll see what people kind of respond with here as far as what do they see in the picture. Yes, we have a horse. Horse, frog, horse, frog, horse. Yes, horse, frog. Yes, we have horses and we have frogs. And the answer is, every one of you is right. There is both horses and there is frogs in this picture. And if you're struggling to find one, I like that, a horse, a frog horse, that's a good one. I like it. But if you're struggling to see the other picture, just tip your head 45 degrees one way. If you tip it to the right, you'll see that the face in the yellow is the horse's face and the mane is down in the blue area. If you tip your head to the left, the horse's face turns into being a frog and it's sitting on grass that's in now what looks like a stream, the blue area. The big point of why I use this one and why I like to present it is it goes and shows that we can look at the exact same thing at the exact same moment in time. And a picture is pretty simple. This isn't a dynamic situation like a conversation, a meeting, a conference where there's a lot more going on. We're just looking at a single picture. And we have people that saw completely different things. So the two things to really remember about this is neurodiversity, first off, is recognizing that other people have different perspectives. And to them, their perspective is just as real as your perspective is to you. And then the other thing to recognize with this is sometimes you have to do a little more explaining about what it is you're talking about or showing so that people who have that different perspective can get on board with you and point out to them, oh, no, I see a frog, and show them where the frog really is. This is a little story to give you an idea about how wide the range can be of how people perceive, process, and think. And this is out of my own personal life. As an autistic, a lot of us as autistics tend to eat the exact same thing for well, quite a while. I go a year and a half, 2 years eating the same breakfast, same lunch. My wife insists on variety, so dinners, I can't get away with it. And I happen to be on a kick of eating for lunch roast beef sandwiches on potato bread. Definitely not a health kick, but they were pretty tasty. And my wife and I would go to the grocery store and we'd step in the bread aisle looking for my brand, because being an autistic, it's got to be a specific brand. We're kind of rigid sometimes. And I would be reading the wrappers, reading a text on them, trying to find the brand name. And then once I found the brand name, I would look for the particular flavor that I liked. And my wife would inevitably just point and go, honey, it's right over there. And I'd walk over to where she pointed, and she was right every single time. And I had gotten through maybe 10 different bread wrappers. She's already pointing at it. After about a year and a half, I went and asked her, how is it you do that? And what she said was very enlightening to me. She said, I just look at the end of the wrapper, and your bread is the only one that has an orange circle on the end of the wrapper. Here, I thought all the information was in the words. And it's not that I can't see orange. When she pointed it to it, I could see the orange perfectly well, but I wasn't looking for orange because that wasn't where information is for my brain. But for her brain, she's very, very color conscious and color aware. She just needed an identifying mark. And when she found that identifying mark, that was my bread. But I do like to say I did end up winning eventually. A few months ago, we were in the store and we were looking for her coffee. And she comes up to me and says, honey, I don't think they have my coffee. I think we'll have to go elsewhere. And I reach up and I grab the box and I hand it to her. Guess what? The company rebranded their box. What used to be a solid color now had pictures on it. So it wasn't the image she was looking for, but the text was still identical and it was still the same names. So you can see, it's not that one approach is better and one approach is worse. It's that we want to know all the approaches so that we can make a good decision of who has the best approach, or maybe it's a composite of all the approaches that's going to be the best approach for the challenge that we're facing at the time. This just gives you a little idea. A lot of people think that they don't work with any neurodistinct individuals. And I would say that that is probably untrue. You just don't know you work with neurodistinct individuals. Because if we look at the prevalence, and hopefully the slide's big enough that you can read the numbers on it, I didn't list all the conditions that we would consider being neurodistinct. I just listed a small number of them, probably, 15% of them or so. And when we add these numbers up, we come up with over 50%. Now, we do recognize that you can have co-occurrence, you can have multiple conditions at the same time, but again, I didn't put in all the groups. So if we put in all the groups, what we really see is the neurodistinct are probably a larger group than the neurotypicals. But because the neurodistinct don't draw together, because there's such a variety of thinking in there, such a variety of patterns, we don't have that cohesion of neurotypicals. So neurotypicals always appear like they're a bigger group, and again, they're the ones that get to set the norms because they pull together at these things. But I think this really shows that there are far more neurodistinct individuals floating around in the world than you ever imagine, which is why I say I'll almost guarantee you work with people who are neurodistinct and likely don't know it. So let's just take a look at some people who are neurodistinct so we can get a little bit of an idea, maybe break some stereotypes and some people that we might not have even known were neurodistinct. And this particular slide has autistic individuals. And we have a lot of thought that autistic individuals are great in computer programming. And that kind of came out of the Autism at Work movement that started around 2015 with a lot of the tech companies. But the reality is autistics are in a huge amount of career fields. I mean, we see here, we've got a comedian. For those of you who don't know who Barbara McClintock is, she was a chemist, award-winning chemist. I think you all know who Greta is, environmental activist. Daryl Hannah, actor. We have Satoshi. Satoshi created Pokemon. And we have Susan Boyle. So we have one person that was related to a computer, and all the other ones are in totally different industries that most people don't think autistics can do. So we don't want to generalize. Can't say that, oh, you're in this group, you can only work in this particular area. We have to recognize we're individuals, and we all have different strengths regardless of what neurodistinction we may have, or just like neurotypicals. There's not one arena that neurotypicals work in. They work in all industries. So let's take a quick look at another one, ADHD, another very, very common neurodistinction. And when we look at ADHD, we see we have a bunch of different things. Dee Kamen, inventor of Segway. We have actress. We have Walt Disney, who kind of revolutionized entertainment, and particularly children's entertainment. We have athlete, we have astronaut, and we have business innovator. Very, very wide range of things. So again, not stuck to just a single industry. And then last, just take a look at some dyslexics to kind of round out some of the different neurodistinct categories. So we've at least looked at a few different ones to see that everyone has strengths and has people who have done very notable things. Now, the first thing I want to point out on this one is you'll notice that Richard Branson was actually on the last slide also. Richard has both dyslexia and ADHD, but he's been pretty successful with it in spite of that. Then we also have here again, musician, we have athletes, we have actors, we have comedians, and there could be way more. I just couldn't fit. You can only fit so many pictures on the slide before the slide becomes gibberish. But I think this gives you a little picture of the great range of career paths that neurodistinct individuals can have, and that we can't pigeonhole them of saying, oh, autistics are this way and they need to do this, and dyslexics are this way and they can only do that, and so on and so forth. I like to use this picture because what I'm really trying to illustrate here is how it is we got to understanding the different neurodistinct conditions, and how that way of getting there is actually harming us when we're now in the workplace. And if we take a look at the scientists on the left, these are great scientists. They went to great universities, good grades, great research habits. They're doing a great job. And they're watching Mr. Chicken as he runs across the road. Obviously, they're trying to figure out, why did the chicken cross the road? And they're going to go back to their lab and they're going to take a look at all their notes. They're going to discuss it. And one of them might say, well, did you see those bushes in the distance, those bushes with those flowers on them? I'm pretty sure there were berries and seeds on those bushes. And I bet you that the chicken was running over there to get something to eat, which from a human brain sounds like a pretty reasonable thing to do. But if we go and ask Mr. Chicken, who is on the right-hand side, and Mr. Chicken, first off, has gained new skills. Mr. Chicken isn't a kid anymore, got some experience, gained skills, gained new behaviors to the more adult world that Mr. Chicken's in. And Mr. Chicken says, just ask me and I'll tell you why I crossed the road. And Mr. Chicken may say something like, well, those flowers you saw on the other side, you're right, that's what attracted me, but I didn't want to eat them. Mrs. Chicken loves those flowers, and I was going to pluck some and bring them home to Mrs. Chicken. Very, very different way to look at it. And that's why we can't always take and just go from the way we see it in our mind and extend that out to being what's going on for the other person. Because for us, that might be what it would mean, but for a completely different person who thinks very differently, it may not mean that at all. So big takeaway from here is simply, just because you observe something happening doesn't mean that you really understood what was going on. You've got to ask to figure out what's going on, because you need to know what's going on in that person's mind, of how they're perceiving it, thinking about it, to understand why the situation went the way that it went. Now, what's really the point of this whole training? The point is not to turn you into diagnosticians. I think I'm fairly safe to say I don't think any of you are doctors. It was 2 weeks ago, I was giving a presentation, and it happened to be a health care facility. And I'm going, I don't think any of you are doctors. And it dawned on me, actually about half of them really are doctors. But the point is not to make you a diagnostician that you can go in and identify in your coworkers of, oh, you're dyslexic, I think, and oh, you have ADHD, I'm pretty sure, and whatever. Because that's really going to accomplish nothing. The important part is we're trying to create awareness and perception of these differences, and these differences being normal, so that when you see somebody who perceives different, processes different, has different challenges than you have, you can think back and go, Maybe it's not that they don't have the skills. Maybe their brain works in a way that makes that item challenging. And then it becomes much easier to become an ally if we just look at it and say, how can I help you with what I see as a challenge to you? Instead of trying to accuse them of being in some grouping that maybe they're not comfortable saying it, even if they are in that group. So point here is, accept the differences. We really don't care why the difference came about. Just accept people are different. I like to use this to try and put things together into diversity and understanding, where does neurodiversity fit into diversity? Obviously, diversity has been around for a long time. Your organization is doing phenomenal, great things in creating more understanding in that arena. But neurodiversity is much newer. And a lot of people are not sure of how it fits, because the way it all got started and got presented, it was, oh, autistics are great at programming computers. We're going to recruit autistics, and they're just going to be great computer programmers. Which isn't really a very diverse thing. That's very much stereotyping, because not all of us autistics are great computer programmers. I'm in the tech world, but we just looked and saw how many different career fields were covered just by 6 images that we put up there. And again, that was not all of them. I actually think that we could look at traditional diversity, and we can look at it and think about it this way. Traditional diversity usually is looking at things that you see from the outside. What culture did you come from? What is your skin light? Is your skin dark? Do you have 2 X chromosomes, or do you have an X and Y chromosome? Those kind of things. And we're doing a fairly good job, I think. Some companies better than others. Your company doing a great job of getting people to understand that just because you have those differences between you doesn't mean that there's not value with each one of the groups. But I think if we just look at it from the surface, we're missing a piece. And the piece we're missing is, what makes those groups really different? It's not that my skin is light and somebody else's skin is dark, or I'm a male and somebody's a female, or I'm attracted to the opposite gender and other people are not attracted to the opposite gender. What makes us different is we perceive, process, and think differently. So it comes down to, who cares whether we perceive, process, and think differently because we come from what would be a traditional diversity category of, say, a particular culture, or whether we do it because our brain is wired in a certain way. The important part is, we need all of those. So I really think that neurodiversity isn't something unique and separate from diversity. Neurodiversity is really just adding in some additional cultural groups to what we already look as diversity. And it's probably most like the LGBTQ plus arena, in that it doesn't matter whether you're white, whether you have dark skin, it doesn't matter about anything. You can be autistic, you can have ADHD, you can have any of them. So there's a huge amount of intersectionality going on also, which very much is, a diversity concept. So to me, it's really just another piece of diversity that we just haven't considered it from the standpoint of thinking differences as opposed to more outward appearance type differences. Now, how come we often don't recognize and don't understand neurodiversity when we might be seeing it right in front of us? And I think that is because we don't use the right model. Oftentimes, people will try and make any neurodistinct condition work like that top picture is, where you have somebody who has low support needs or high support needs. So in other words, impacted greatly, not impacted very much. And they think you can just put them on the line somewhere. That'd be like having a cold. You have a really severe cold, you might be on a 10 on the scale. You have a mild cold, you might be a 2 on the scale. But because the symptoms are the same for a cold, it's very easy to put it on one linear line, one continuum. But when we deal with neurodistinctions, we deal with humans, we are far, far more complex than colds. It's like the picture down in the bottom. And those particular charts are actually my particular charts. The way you interpret them would be the areas with more blue are areas that I struggle more with, I have more challenge with. And the areas with very little blue are areas that come to me very easily. Now, unfortunately, the words are too small for you to read which one is which, but I can just tell you one of them that you'll probably won't guess, but if you looked at the chart with the words on it, you'd know right away. My outward communication is very strong. I can do a pretty good job communicating to one-on-one or communicating to one on large groups. But my inward communication is horrible. I can't pick up on emotional nuances. I can't pick up when the emotional tone in the room changes. It just goes over my head. And that would be one where you would see very little struggle, but then next to it, something that's huge struggle. So outbound communication easy, inbound communication for me, very, very challenging, very, very difficult. And we can't reduce that to a single number, because if we can reduce that to a single number, you'd have no clue that which parts were strong, which parts were weak. You would just have an average. And that's my personal dislike with some of these things like Myers-Briggs and all those kind of things. We can't turn humans into 4 letters or 3 boxes or something like that. Humans are too complex. We need to understand the individual areas of strengths and challenges so that we can draw on your strengths and we can help make sure that we don't push you into areas that are major challenges for you. This one's a fun one I use to help explain where is it that communication can easily go wrong. And remember, everybody thinks a little different. If I say the word beach, you mostly will have a picture, an image, a thought that comes to mind. And based upon surveys I've done of asking people, most people's beach is going to have white sand, it's going to have palm trees, it's going to have blue ocean, maybe a light breeze, maybe a pina colada in your hand. And that for most people, that's a beach. Tropical beach, vacation, fun time. I grew up in the Adirondacks in upstate New York at what was called the gateway to the Adirondacks. It was the only highway into the Adirondacks. And I was a Boy Scout, and I did a lot of canoeing because Adirondacks is some of the best canoe waters in the United States. And I continued to canoe as I got older. So one time I went canoe camping, and I camped out on this little island in the lake that had a circular beach all the way around it. My beach, when I think of a beach, is that beach. So my beach has fresh water around it, pine trees and mountains surrounding it, which is very different from that beach of the tropical beach. So if I say something about a beach and I'm asking you to do something related to the beach, and you're thinking one picture and I'm thinking the other, if we can get it that wrong with beach, how wrong can we get it when the words become much more complex than a beach? Point being here, you've got to make sure that you verify when you're communicating the details. Ask about that beach. Okay, so does your beach have white sand? No, my beach has brown sand. Okay, that's a little different. What's the surroundings of your beach? Mine has mountains. Mine has blue water. And we find out that we're just not at all on the same track. And that allows us to course correct and saves us from doing lots of work that at the end we find out wasn't what was actually desired. So just think about beach and think about how things can go wrong if somebody has a different picture of their beach than your beach. Another area that I like to talk about a lot, being a neurodistinct communication specialist, is communication. And we're not going to dive very deep into this one. This could be an entire seminar all by itself. But I'm going to explain the picture on the right-hand side kind of from a peripheral standpoint, and then I'm going to give you a little personal story that I think will help really underscore what is going on. So here we have a person who is speaking on the rightmost hand side, and they're speaking in 3 different modes simultaneously. They're using words, which I think they're too small to see, but that rainbow strip actually has words inside that rainbow strip. And for me, words are what I get. And you saw with the bread wrappers, I'm looking at the text because that's where I think the information is in the text. I think the information for the communication is in the words. So I get the words and I take them literally like the dictionary says. But people also use tonality. And they could use tonality in a way where they say something along the lines of, oh, that was just the best meeting I've ever been in, which for those of you who can pick up on the emotional nuances of tonality will recognize was sarcastically saying that meeting stunk. I don't pick up on them. I can communicate them, but I can't pick up on them very well. So I would take it that you meant that was really a great meeting. And I'd be thinking you're a little strange because to me that was not a very good meeting, but why are you saying it's a good meeting? And then lastly, the little orange faces are if we're dealing with a visual communication media like we are here, there is facial expressions and body language that also can contradict or alter the words. So where's that all mean and where's that go to? I'll give you an example. I was on the first day of a vacation and I got a text from my boss that she wanted to have a meeting with me. Now, I've been fired enough times in my life to know that when your boss reaches out on the first day of your vacation, that is not a very good sign. But we set up the meeting, we start talking, she starts telling me about all these things I did the last day or two that were not the right thing to do, that to me were the perfect and correct thing to do. And at some point she says, Tim, I think you should look for a new job. And that seems pretty straightforward to me. After being fired enough, I think you should look for a new job. Sounds like you're on the way out the door. So I asked her, shouldn't we get HR involved now? And she seemed really perplexed, but agreed that we'd get HR involved. We get HR involved and they go back and forth. They talk to me, they talk to her, they talk to me, they talk to her. And this is really what ended up coming out of the whole thing. If she had used her words better, and English was not her first language, so I'm not saying that she doesn't know how to communicate, but English is about her third language, actually. So English is not her strongest language. And fortunately, English is my only language, so we were in English. If she had used English better, she would have said something like, Tim, this role that you're in of having to juggle so many multiple clients at the same time, I can see how it's stressing you. And I don't think long-term this is going to be good for your mental health. And I think it would be better if you would look for a different role that would suit you better. And I would have understood that perfectly. But what she said was, I think you should look for a new job. But what I missed was in her tonality, she had caring, she had concern. And I totally missed that part. So you can see, because I didn't pick up that tonality in her voice of expressing the caring and concern, I just took the words. Could they have been better words? Yeah, possibly. But nonetheless, all of us don't always use the best words every single time. And I took those and I got completely the wrong picture of what she was trying to do than what really was going on. And ended up, we became great friends. There's actually an article on Google's Life about us, and she helped find, actually she not helped find, she found the next position for me, got it all arranged, and got me into a position that does suit me much, much better. So kind of an interesting little story about if you can't pick up all the nuances of the communication, and not everybody can, then you're not going to understand. So we just have to be careful to be clear. And as I said, this could be a whole complete seminar on its own, and we're not trying to make that, so we'll just move on and hopefully talk about this at a later date and dig into it deeper. Culture fit. I am pretty well convinced that most people tend to be maintainers of the status quo. We are concerned about what other people think about us. We try not to push the boundaries too far. We like to be unique. We like to be individual. But on the other hand, we don't want to be that person standing way out there that everybody's going, that one's pretty weird out there. So generally maintain status quo. But if you run into an organization, or you have within the organization that there's groups that are in groups and out groups, it ends up being kind of like in that picture. We've got the in groups of the Batman, and Spider-Man just doesn't fit in because Spider-Man's thinking and way of looking and way of being is not supporting the norms of the group. So they just feel that Spider-Man doesn't belong, and Spider-Man gets pushed out and disregarded. But the problem is Spider-Man sometimes has the innovative idea that we actually need to solve the problem. And Spider-Man brings the unique perspective. Sometimes it's not the unique perspective, and the Batmans will have the unique perspective. But if we don't accept Spider-Man and listen to the perspective, and at least consider that it potentially could be an answer, and evaluate it as if it could possibly be right, not that it has to be right every time, but at least give the respect of saying, that's an interesting idea. Let's take a look and see if maybe that is a good way to go. Then we end up not using the innovation that companies take great efforts to bring together people who are different so we can have those perspectives. So everyone adds a unique way of thinking into an innovative culture. And if we don't go and bring people together and embrace those different people, then what we're going to do is shortchange the company for all their efforts they did to bring together unique people. And we're likely not to get the best overall solution that we could because we didn't take in the entire range of facts and thoughts that were available. Now, here's a little story that about me. I live in Colorado, and that is me on top of in this case, it's about a 13,500 foot peak, and obviously it is winter. And I like hiking what we call 14ers out here. And a 14er is a mountain that's over 14,000 feet. Any metric types, that's a little over 4,000 meters. And I like to hike those in the winter. Snowshoe on them. It's wonderful. There's nobody out there. It's a cool time. So I went one time out to go summit one of our 14ers, and I started out about 8 a.m. It was, again, a solo hike because that's kind of the way I like to go. I sometimes say I like to go with people that understand me, so I go alone. And I'm out hiking. I'm having a great time. I'm enjoying myself. I'm working my way, closer to the peak and on the way up the peak. And it's just a gorgeous sunny day. There's virtually no wind, and I totally lose track of time just in the solitude. If you've never been out in the middle of nowhere with a complete blanket of snow, you don't know how quiet and peaceful that really is. Now, I'm about 300 feet vertical from the summit now, and at that point, the trail, which was coming up a face, hits a ridge. You turn, a little over 90 degrees and go up the ridge, and you would be at the top. I turn, I look over my shoulder, and the sun that had been behind me all day, I see it's just getting ready to set behind the mountains on the other side. I changed my plan. I'm not trying to make the peak anymore. I'm now trying to get down off there as fast as I can safely and get off the most dangerous, rocky, steep part of the peak so that by the time it gets dark, at least I'm in something that is, easier terrain to be able to maneuver across. And I was able to do it. By the time I got down off the worst, rockiest part and switched from crampons back to snowshoes, at that point is about when it got totally dark. Now, again, I mentioned I was a Boy Scout. I do believe in being prepared, and I have a very, complete pack with me. I like to carry enough stuff that if I have to make it overnight in the winter in the mountains, that I can make it overnight in the winter in the mountains. And I had a headlamp, so I pull out the headlamp, and now I'm at least able to see 8-10 feet in front of me, so I don't have to worry about falling off the edge of a ledge or something like that. But unfortunately, it's a moonless night, so I can't really get any bearings because it's pitch black, other than 8 or 10 feet in front of me, which is not enough to get your bearings. So I start hiking back and forth and trying to find this ridge road that goes over the pass that in the winter is under about 6 to 10 feet of snow. In the summer, you're able to go across it and drive across it. And I'm hiking. I think that I actually went and passed it because now I'm going back up in elevation. So I think I was going in a valley, like back and forth in a U from the one I was on to the peak on the other side. And I was thinking that I missed the road because it was buried under snow. If you've ever been in Colorado mountain roads, that they don't mark them very well. The posts are only about 3 feet high, so they'd be completely buried under snow. Easy to walk over one and miss it. This goes on for quite a while. It ends up being about 10 p.m. Remember, I started at 8 a.m. So I've been hiking for now, 12 hours. And I am getting fatigued, and the wind starts to pick up. So again, I'm prepared. I have a snow shovel with me, emergency snow shovel, and I dig a little snow cave. I climb in the snow cave, and I get some rest, and about an hour later, it gets really boring, and by then the wind had stopped. So I decided I wasn't going to hang out in the snow cave. It was just too darn boring to do that. The wind stopped anyways. I was going to go out and see if I could figure out my way back. And I start hiking again. 10, 15 minutes later, I recognize that my car is lost. I knew where I was, so it was my car that was really the problem, I'm convinced, or I at least tell the story that way. And I do carry a satellite communicator, and I reach over here and I kind of talk about it because that's exactly where it hangs on my pack. And I've never in my life hit the SOS button, but this time I hit the SOS button on it. And not that I wanted to be rescued at all. I actually wanted them to just give me a compass bearing to find the road so that I could just go down the road. But to contact the center, you have to hit the SOS button. And I text them as soon as we make contact, because it's two-way text satellite communicator. And I ask them, can you point me towards the road across the peak? And they say, emergency rescue crew on the way. And then 10 minutes later, give me a general direction that I would go to get to the road. I can't stop the emergency crew at this point. They're going to be coming anyways, but I can start working my way towards the road. So I start doing that. And about, 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that, I see lights bobbing around in the distance. And I obviously figure out that's my rescue crew because nobody else would be up in the middle of the mountains like that otherwise. And here I was thinking that rescue was going to be really cool, like helicopter. That would have been kind of cool. Snowmobiles, a little less cool, but still not bad. No, we finally figure out it's 3 guys on snowshoes. We have a ravine between us, and they yell over to me of, can you come over to where we are? And I yell back of, yeah, I'll be right there. And I have to skirt and work my way around the ravine and get where they are. And they go, can you make it another 1.75 miles? And we'll have a snowcat waiting for us. And it will take us down to the winter parking lot that's about 3,000 feet vertical lower. And hey, I've already hiked 14 miles. What the heck? So it's another 1.75 miles. So we hike along. We're having a great chat. One of them remarks about what a beautiful night it was to be out hiking. And we get to the snowcat. I'm having a great time. I've always wanted to ride on a snowcat. We ride it down. We get to the bottom. I find my wife and my daughters waiting. Didn't realize they called the sheriff patrol, thought that I might not be capable of driving. So they called my wife and daughter to come get me. And I'm telling them about the great, wonderful time I had. And what went on in the whole thing is many people just would be panicked thinking about being on a mountain that high at all, much less in the winter, much less at night with a moonless night. But for me, each step was simply assessing what did I have to deal with? What equipment did I have? What skills did I have? And what condition was I in? And making a decision and just iterating through those decisions. And I never had any concern or any panic. But what I found out quite quickly was for most people, when you tell them the story, instant panic sets in and they think you're absolutely nuts for even trying doing those things in the winter. So I think that gives you a little different idea of how uniqueness can be hidden. You don't know if that person next to you has that ability to just keep going through whatever the challenge is and just assess it and move forward, or they're the type of person that is going to react from the emotions of the situation. Not that one's right or one's wrong, but if you're stuck on a mountain, it's a whole lot better to just iterate through what's to deal with than it is to panic. Panicking won't get you much anywhere when you're up in those altitudes. Deciding to disclose. So deciding to disclose, if you're somebody who is neurodistinct, it's totally up to you. If you are somebody who is not neurodistinct and thinking somebody is, don't expect them that they're going to disclose. This is a very personal thing, just like it's a personal thing to say whether you're gay or whatever your orientation it is. You got to leave it up to the individual. So remember, it's up to them to decide to disclose. It's not up to you to decide to disclose. But the other thing that goes with disclosure, and this is where some people kind of get it wrong that do have a neurodistinct condition, is it's not a free pass. It's not a get out of jail free card. It is simply letting other people know who you are and how better to deal with you. In other words, why do we use pronouns oftentimes in our names? And as you can see on mine, I put autistic in front of my pronouns. So I kind of hijacked it a little bit, but I think that group had a phenomenal idea of, in order to respectfully interact with me, you need to know who I am, and I need to tell you because you can't see it just by looking at me. I think it's a great idea. So I put autistic in there because in order to interact with me, you need to know that up front. But that doesn't get me out of not behaving appropriately, not behaving the way that is expected in a company. It's not a free pass. It's simply a way to reduce barriers so that people can communicate better, but it doesn't get you out of trouble if you've done something that violated the norms and the acceptable way to be in the company. And then last thing is just a couple little communication tips that these apply to everybody. So it doesn't matter neurodistinct, neurotypical. I think these would just be good communication rules to apply. And again, this could be a whole nother seminar because trust me, I have more slides in this one that have communication tips. But the first one is check for stress and overwhelm. How many of us are doing well when we're stressed out? Something went wrong in the morning, the coffee got burned, it dumped down your favorite pair of pants, the car wouldn't start, the dog wouldn't come back in the house, on and on and on. It was just an absolute disaster of a day. You get to work, you find out that there's emails about 12 things that you need to do that you didn't think ever about or just got thrown on you. You're probably not in a great mood or great even spot mentally to have very deep conversation with. So check if the person's stressed and overwhelmed. If they're stressed and overwhelmed, have the conversation at a different time. It's just not going to be effective. I don't think it works for any of us when we're in those conditions, whether you're on the giving side or the receiving side. Next one is go in one direction at a time. And what do I mean by that? Back when we were all in the office, it would normally be we'd have a meeting in the conference room. And how many meetings have you been in the conference room that broke into 4 or 5 separate little meetings with sub-conversations going on at the same time? It happened all the time. When we're doing it virtually, how many times is the conversation that's going on through the audio and the pictures totally different than the conversation that's going on in the chat box? Far too often. And people can't follow all of that. So it's not effective communication. Much better, one person talks, other people listens, that person ends, next person talks, other people listens. So one direction, one time. And then lastly, no idioms, no figure of speeches, and no slang, because not everybody's going to understand those. And I think one that I like that illustrates it absolutely the best is there was this little girl, and it was Christmas time, and she was asking her mother, why is it that all the neighbors have these beautiful lights out in front of their house? And mom said to the little girl, oh, that's for people that have time on their hands. Mom's taking the little girl to school, little girl sitting in the back seat. Mom looks up, sees her in the mirror, and the little girl's holding her hand out, just looking perplexed. And mom asks about it, and the little girl says, how can somebody hold time in their hands? Well, obviously, having time in your hands is an idiom. The little girl was taking it literally. But every culture, every group has their own speak, and you can't expect people to understand your speak. You have to use speak that everybody understands. So with that, we have hit the end. And now we've got some time for question and answer. And I like to say it is fully open. There is no subjects, no topics that are too extreme to ask about. You can ask about how many times they got fired. You can ask whatever you want, and I will give you the best answer I can around it.